I am Kristen Garner. My job is to be staff attorney for the Arkansas School Boards Association. And that is a very ambiguously titled organization. My whole family believes that I work for the state of Arkansas. I do not. They have always believed that I work for the state of Arkansas. I do not. I work for a private, non-profit helper organization that has no regulatory authority at all. So, just so we're clear, I'm not here from the government, and I'm not here to help you. But I am here to help you. I'm just not here from the government. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I'm a lawyer, and I live in part of one volume of the Arkansas Code, and this is all I do. And a lot of what I do for money is I sit around and wait for school board members or school administrators to have a problem, need to ask a question, need help with something, and then I'm like 911, I answer the phone and I sort them out, or I reply to the email. But also like 911, nobody calls me to tell me things are going well. You know, because seriously, when's the last time y'all called 911? Was something on fire? Had somebody fallen out? Last time I called 911, my husband was huffing and puffing like he was having a baby. He had shoulder surgery the prior week, and then decided to enliven my Tuesday by having a pulmonary embolism. 1 star, do not recommend. Do not put that on your bucket list. That is a bad deal. Anyway, so here I am, and here we are. Okay, that's scary. So here we are, and we're going to talk about law and best practices, PPC, personnel policy committees.
Sorry, you're good.
Okay, can I
Yep.
advance, because I kind of need to see. Okay, slideshow. Okay, awesome. Okay, so the goals of this training are to dispel some common myths about the roles and duties of the personnel policy committees. Often over time, mythology has developed, and oral tradition has developed, and sometimes the oral tradition deviates from what the statutory law says. And I think that it's very important to periodically go back to the source and find out what the law actually says. We're going to review policy adoption timelines and the role of whole staff votes. There's a lot of confusion about when it is necessary for everyone to engage in balloting behavior. There is a lot of confusion around balloting and voting, and when it's a vote and when it's a poll, and I am very determined to leave clarity in my wake on those subjects. Okay, and then finally, with respect to late adopted licensed policies, we will discuss what I call the policy caution zone period. One of your flowchart handouts is on that. The other one is on the policy adoption timeline and process. So those are, I just have to freely confess to you that I am a terrible nerd, and part of my nerdness is, although I'm not very good at it, I do enjoy making flowcharts. Okay, but possibly like me, you need time alone with yourself and the flowchart, and you're probably not going to enjoy it in the meeting, but you may enjoy it later on, if that's how your brain works. Okay, so about this presentation, it is based on law. I clearly label opinion slides when it's my opinion. If it's my recommendation, I will say Kristen recommends or Kristen suggests, because I don't think it's fair for someone who is a lawyer to try to impose their opinion on you and pretend that it's law. That's wrong, and I'm not going to do that. Okay? I believe that following the law is right and good, and that people should follow the law. That is one of my core beliefs. I also believe that strict role differentiation with respect to policy creation and adoption is very important and is very good for school districts. I want the board to do the job the law has given the board to do. And I want the licensed PPC to do their job, and I want the classified PPC to do their job. I want everybody to do their own job, and I want everybody to keep their eyes on their own paper. And I don't want people to try to do other people's job, because that's when a lot of problems and confusion start to exist. I'm also against something that I call mission creep, which is when this is your job, but then you try to make this your job. Okay? And we'll talk, and I have lots to say on that subject, and I'm an equal opportunity fusser, and I have fusses on mission creep that I direct at the school board, and then I have fusses about mission creep that I direct at the policy committees. Okay? But just remember, I'm an equal opportunity fusser. I will fuss by the time everybody will have been fussed at or admonished, or I will have attempted to modify your behavior. Okay? So my expectations is anybody who's in this room, already established that everybody in this room is a legitimate participant. Every now and then I have lots of community members or just ordinary people who aren't on a committee show up. But anybody can ask me a question. I hope that everybody will be a respectful participant. That seems like a reasonable expectation. So what is a personnel policy committee? Every school district by law is supposed to have 2 PPCs. There is supposed to be a completely separate committee for teachers and a separate one for support staff. And these groups are composed of employees 100% picked by their peers, and their whole job is to represent the interests of that group. The board has no power to in any way make policy that dictates or directs any aspect of this. None. They have no control over that process. Y'all are on your own for that. Okay? So once I had a guy call me. He had been hired to be the new superintendent of a school district. And the previous superintendent had been there for about 30 years. He called me and he said, get this, they don't have PPCs. It's like, well, what do you mean? Of course they do. They have to have. No, they didn't have PPCs at all. He said, can you come in after I take over? I said, well, I don't have any authority to do anything, but I can tell them what the law is. And so I did, and I said, you know, if y'all want to do this with me, the teachers could go over there and the classified could go, and it turned out they did want to. And then we went through it, you know, if you wanted to, you could do this, and they wanted to. If y'all wanted to, you could do this, and then classifieds, these are the groups, and if you wanted to, you could go form yourself into these groups. And in about 15 minutes, we had 2 PPCs, okay? But it was only because they chose to voluntarily accept my suggestions. They were under absolutely no obligation whatsoever to do so. And no one has the ability to boss y'all about that, okay? So, there is no limit on the number of members. There are minimum numbers in the law, but there are no maximum numbers, okay? There are limits on how many members of management can serve, but there are no limits on how many rank and file members can serve. I talked to a very small school district that now no longer exists because it was so tiny, and they said that they had 20 teachers, K-12, and their PPC consisted of all 20 teachers. And I was like, and that works for them? Works fine. Okay for you people. How very nice for you. That sounds like, I mean, I was very surprised, but okay, y'all do you, okay? Now, what about school board members? Does a school board member have a role at a PPC meeting? Hard no. Remember what I said about role differentiation. Board members have a very important role, but it is not to barge into your PPC meetings. So you should not invite them to your meetings, nor should they attend your meetings if you do invite them, okay? They have their job, they need to do their job at a board meeting, that's where they do their job. Y'all do your jobs as committee members at committee meetings. Okay, so what is a personnel policy? Lots of things that are interesting to y'all are not actually personnel policies. A personnel policy tells you how, when, or where a person does his or her job. That's a personnel policy. What day of the month, how often do y'all get paid here? Once a month or twice a month?
Once.
That is not a personnel policy. I know it's super interesting to you, but it is not a personnel policy because pay frequency or pay day does not tell you how, when, or where to do your job. What about expense reimbursement? I bet y'all are super interested in what your mileage rate is when you travel on school business. Y'all are, of course, reasonably enough, super interested in that. But it is not a personnel policy. So the first question is this even a personnel policy? I got an email today from a superintendent. Oh gosh, I'm really struggling. Please walk me through this PPC problem. I want to consider changing our meal reimbursement to a per diem, blah, blah, blah. Reply. That is not a personnel policy. That is not anything that you need to or have to involve. Now, you can certainly ask what they think, but it's outside of the scope of their responsibility because it's outside of the definition of what a personnel policy is. Now, your salary schedule is by law a personnel policy because the law says it is. Your calendar is a personnel policy because A, the law says it is, and B, it meets the definition. It tells you when your work days are. Okay? So if y'all have an emergency drop dead calendar emergency, like I had a school district that got a happy phone call from a television station, and the television station wanted to televise one of their high school football games, which just cheered everybody up, right? There was only one teeny tiny problem. It was going to make them have to change their schedule because that was going to be in the middle of what otherwise would have been parent-teacher conferences. It's like, okay, well, it's going to take cooperation with both the licensed and the non-licensed personnel policies committee and following final board action, a vote of the staff to agree to a mid-year change. It's possible, but there's steps, okay? But district calendar is a personnel policy. Why is this relevant? Not everything that's interesting or important to you is actually a personnel policy. There's enough for everybody to do that is a personnel policy. Let's not add more things to the plate. But remember, policy creation and adoption is a key duty of the school board, and I would argue it's the most important thing that the school board does. A policy is made out of power, just like ham salad is made out of ham, and tuna salad is made out of tuna. To make tuna salad, what do you have to first have? Cans of tuna fish. You don't have any cans of tuna fish, you can't make tuna salad. A board has to have policy and power in an area, they can't make policy out of it. But what policy is a calm, sober, thoughtful, and considered pre-commitment of the power of the board. It is easy to make policy when nobody is yelling at you, nobody is tugging at your shirt. Does anybody by chance have kids? Okay, is it easy to think through things that impact your kids when they're all in your face and dancing in front of you and tugging on your garments? Sometimes you're like, oh, wow, if I had thought about that more, I might have made a different decision about sleepovers. Sleepovers, and then you quickly realize that if you have a kid to your house for a sleepover, it's kind of hard to not let your kid go to that kid's house. And I'm like, really wished I'd thought that one through a little harder before anybody can come sleep over at my house, but, you know, sometimes you're just not super comfy, because you didn't think that one through on the front end? Okay, but policy adoption is creation is a key duty of the school board. So there are certain policies that are a whole lot easier to make when people aren't excited or yelling at you or super interested in the outcome. For instance, a school board might adopt a policy that says we will only consider legal transfers twice a year, because you're getting upset at the coach, mama, is not an emergency for us. And if a kid's going to change schools, it's best to do it at the very beginning of the year, next case scenario at semester. But it's really hard to make a dispassionate decision when you've got people sobbing in the boardroom, right, watching you make decisions. Okay, mission creep. Told you I was going to talk bad about mission creep, and here we are. Mission creep occurs when, on the part of the school board lets the PPC exceed its statutory authority, or when the school board gets over busy and overreaches and attempts to control a PPC with an inappropriate policy. Every year I have a couple of school districts contact me, and I have to kind of scold them back into position, because it's either a PPC asking for board policy, or a board that wants to make PPC policy, and the board doesn't have the power over the PPC in the first place to make policy that bosses the PPC. Does that make sense? So if a policy that is not a personnel policy, or a topic that is not a personnel policy or a potential personnel policy, is introduced by the PPC chair at a board meeting and it's off topic, then they should be politely told, thank you very much, that's off topic. Do you have something that is a personnel policy that we can discuss? You should not take up the very valuable time of the board. The time of the board is a scarce resource. They're volunteers, they don't get paid. They could be watching television, they'd probably rather be watching television. We're eating into their television time. So if it's not an appropriate topic, it shouldn't be discussed. Okay, the PPC chair people are not ex officio members of the board and should not be given that status. They should not be allowed to pipe up in the middle of or throw their 2 cents in a board meeting. And this is a hard one, and sometimes PPC members are very surprised to hear that the agreement or approval of the PPC or the PPC chair is not legally required for any board action. What a PPC gets by law is the procedural right to be in the loop. They don't have veto power, okay? The other side of mission creep is when, and I once had a protracted back and forth, the PPC was adamant that the board essentially adopt bylaws for their internal operations into policy. I was like, no, they can't do that. They don't have the power to do that. Y'all can adopt bylaws if you want to, but leave the board out of it. Does that make sense? If you can't have the power, if you don't have the power, you can't make policy out of it. The board didn't have the ham to make the ham salad, so they had to stay out of it. Okay? Advocacy. Both the board and the PPC should view their role as big picture and from high up. Have y'all been in an airplane lately? I'm sure you'd love to be in an airplane lately. Pandemic has sort of messed with a lot of people's travel plans. But my family farms, so it's entertaining for me, high up, 30,000 feet in an airplane, to pick out the circles that I know represent pivot irrigation. Okay, so the circles that you see are pivot irrigation. But at that height, I can't see a tractor in a field. You have to get really low to be able to see houses and cars. You have to get really, really, really low to see people standing next to a car. But PPC should be very high up in the air and very big picture. Going to bat for an individual is inappropriate. It's inappropriate when the board makes it their mission to advance the interests of one person or one group over all others. It's inappropriate when a PPC decides to intervene on behalf of a single employee. That is not their job. Their job is to propose policies. Their job is to make comments on proposed policies that originate with the board. Now, are people going to ask you to do that? They certainly are. They have freedom of speech and they have freedom of association, and they're going to ask you to do all sorts of inappropriate things if you're a board member, if you're a PPC. Board members, have y'all been stalked at work yet?
Every day.
Yes, yes, yes. And staff members, think how besieged you sometimes feel by parents who seem to not have any boundaries and seem to think that you want to talk about their child at 4 o'clock in Walmart on a Sunday afternoon when, you know, turns out you just really want to go home with your ice cream sandwiches, right? Okay. So my point is that boundaries are important. It's on the board to stop it when people cross lines. It's on y'all to say, no, thank you, we're not interested in your situation. We're big picture people, we're not advancing the interest of you as an individual, okay?
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so for instance, Steve is certified for a position, and I'm not on the school board, we're not on the school board right now, we're just people.
Okay.
Teaching, and he is certified for a position, he wants that position, he's applied for that position, and the board approves, but we know they're going to approve, because we've seen the minutes, that they're gonna approve somebody else who isn't certified for that position. Is that, so that wouldn't be appropriate for the PPC to say, we want you to
No,
look
that's
at?
not any
That's
of
not,
their
okay.
business. That's not
Okay.
any of their business. And indeed, it is not legally required that a school district hire the person with the weightiest credentials.
Well, yeah, I know that, but what I'm saying is, could they not, it's not appropriate for them to
No.
say, we think that.
They could attempt to introduce a personnel policy that says something about the qualifications of people, but that would be, but commenting or intervening or arguing.
Well, because I know the most credential isn't always necessarily the best person for the job, but isn't there at the state level where they say you should try to hire?
But there's, you know, there's almost always a lot of soft skills involved. Okay, so let me give you an example. Is there anybody in this room who happens to work in elementary school? All right, okay. Library media, is there anybody in this room who is a library media specialist? Okay, I just wanna make sure that I didn't have to dodge and project that. In my children's elementary school, the library media specialist was the hardest working person in the building, okay? And then she retired. And her replacement was the least hard-working person in the whole building. And that taught me a whole lot about the role of a library media specialist, okay? There's a lot of soft skills involved, and I've seen many school districts choose to hire someone who was gonna have to be on an alternative licensure plan, passing over a fully licensed candidate because the ALP candidate had the soft skills, or the support, or the personality, or, okay? I went to elementary school with a woman I later came to believe had a serious personality disorder, okay? Maybe you all have had that experience. When I graduated from law school, I saw her graduating from UALR. She had worked very hard and had achieved a doctorate in psychology. So I graduated from law school, she graduated with a doctorate in psychology. Her day job was to be a preschool teacher for the North Little Rock School District, a position from which she retired because, notwithstanding the degree she had attained, they had figured out she was nuts. Okay? So I'm sure they hired any number of people who had less weighty credentials than she for various roles in the district, but there were very good reasons why they did what they did. Does that make sense? So, but that would not be a PPC job. That being a Greek chorus of commentary about hiring decisions on the part of the board, that would not be an official statutory duty of PPC, but I guess it could be their, extra statutory hobby, if they enjoy that. So what is the legal effect of a personnel policy? You may not realize it, but every personnel policy in this school district is a sword that is sharpened on both sides of the blade, cuts both ways. It imposes duties and burdens and obligation on the staff members, but reciprocally imposes duties and obligations on the part of the school district. Violating a personnel policy puts a school district in breach of contract, at least theoretically. So everybody knows what your employment contract looks like, right? You signed 1 million of them, right? Very familiar with the format, right? It's one page, front only. It's got your name at the top, it's got your signature at the bottom, it's got a lot of blah, blah, blah in the middle, right? That's what your contract looks like. Your contract is not actually a single page of paper. It is that single page of paper and then everything behind the tab in the policy manual that relates to your employment group. So it's actually a very thick document indeed. And it's binding on both parties. Courts are not one bit nice or kind to school districts that violate their own personnel policies. It's pretty much a recipe for losing a lawsuit if a school board is demonstrated to have violated their own policies. So what do you do if you need to violate your own policy? You don't violate your policy, you change your policy, and then you follow the changed policy is what you do. And people don't understand this. They will say, okay, I know your policy says this, but here's a really good reason, and I need you to set it aside temporarily so that I can do this thing that I need to do because I have good reasons, and then you can let it spring back to life and life can go on as normal. And it's like, I hear you, we see you, but we can't do that. And we had good reasons, if you think about it, for making it be a policy in the first place. Now, occasionally, a school board will simply lose its mind and make a bad policy, okay? Let me give you an example. Is anybody in the room old enough to remember 9/11? Okay. Okay. And collectively, all the schools in the United States lost their minds collectively in the aftermath of 9/11, and they said, okay, we are done traveling, we will never leave our state again, and we will never get on an airplane again. That's a hard no, it's too scary, never again. Which lasted for maybe 3 whole minutes in most districts until somebody got national officer or future or something of something, and there was a really good reason for somebody to get on an airplane. And then they came and said, can we have an exception for this thing because it's special? And the answer was, that's not how policy works, but maybe we need to reconsider this policy. Maybe we lost our minds and overreacted. So, the Klingons say, right, that revenge is a dish best served cold. Didn't I get that from Star Trek? Policy is also a dish made not in the heat of passion, but in the cold, rational light of day. Not as an emotional response, but as a carefully considered response. Okay, so just remember, you can't put it on hold, you can't pause it, you can't carve out an exception, but you can change a policy if you realize that you have made a mistake, and sometimes you have made a mistake. Now, let's talk about whose job is what. The board. On the part of the board has the power to propose a policy, and then later, after going through the correct procedural steps, adopt a personnel policy. When it will be effective is a slide for another moment, not this slide. We'll talk about that in a minute. They have the power to adopt the policy. Once the board makes a decision, it's going to happen. The only open question at that point is when it's effective. So board acts, it's going to happen. The only open question is when. Okay? The default date for personnel policy adoption, both sides of the house, licensed and non-licensed, is July 1. Y'all change a policy, the default is July 1 of 23. Want it done sooner? That's when you have to have your whole staff votes. Okay? On the part of the PPC also has the power to suggest a policy to the board. The PPCs have the right of review and the right of comment over policy ideas that begin with the board and have been put into play by the board formally adopting them as proposed policies. In that reserved time, when the PPC chair gets to directly address the school board at a board meeting, that PPC chair has the power to attempt to persuade the board concerning a policy at a board meeting. Do y'all ever, any of you, read in bill form the things that the legislators do? Have you ever read a bill and just like laughed out loud because it was so poorly thought out or completely divorced or devoid from reality? Every now and then you get hold of one and you're just like, oh. Okay, well, sometimes policies can be like that because they're not hearing or listening or aware of the realities of the people who are actually on the ground doing the work. And hearing about a logistical or practical problem with a policy can actually be very valuable input for a board. So I think that the PPCs being involved gives us better policies overall, because then we have both the point of view of the decision makers and the point of view of the people who will be required to implement the policy on the ground. Okay? What a PPC does not have the power to do is stop a proposed policy in its tracks. They can't block it, they can't veto it, they can't say, no, sorry, try again. They just don't have that power. They can try to persuade, but they can't block or veto. So the ultimate final power over policy rests with the school board, rests with management. The school board has the power to adopt or not adopt. The role of the PPC, the role of labor here, is to give a voice to the employees and to allow them to be involved in the adoption process. The ultimate goal is to have the best possible policies, to have the best possible school district. That's the ultimate shared goal. The PPC has important statutory rights given to it by the law, but they're limited. They have that 10 business day review right, the right to address the board. You know, not everybody has the right to address the board. Citizens have to ask, pretty please, mother, may I, to be placed on the agenda. Most of the time, people who ask to be placed on the agenda are told no, simply because most requests are neither appropriate nor timely. Parents sometimes want to yell at the school board about the bad thing that happened to their child, and that's not an appropriate thing for the board to hear about at a board meeting when it happened last week. Because the board may have to give somebody a fair and impartial hearing later, and they aren't going to be able to do that if they've been gotten to in that way. So but the PPC has the ability to address the school board at every regular school board meeting if they choose to use that power. The PPC, however, can't make the board do anything except listen, and they don't have any law-based veto power, and they do not have any law-based power to negotiate on behalf of their constituent groups. It is also not the duty given to any PPC or PPC member by law to involve itself in disputes between employees. Ever had two employees who just couldn't get along? I think we've all seen that. Or a disciplinary matter or a personality clash between a supervisor and employee. Now, there is a element of culture in many school districts that makes employees look to PPC members if they do need a witness or a representative. It's not your job. Raise your hand if you're a PPC member. If you're a PPC member, the law does not make that your job. If you choose to do that, that's a decision you're making as an individual. You can say no, and the law's not mad at you, because the law didn't make that your job. I did this presentation once for a school district, and they were like, okay, stop, wait, say that again. Okay, so I said it again. And I saw all the stress melt out of the shoulders of about 3 people who, up to that point, had believed, because other people believed it at them so hard, that it was their job, although they weren't comfortable doing that and didn't want to do that. They thought it was their job and they had to do that. And they were visibly relieved when I explained that was just the culture in their school district. That was just an expectation that had grown up over time, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the law in the law book. Does anybody have a question about that? Okay. Okay. But you can choose that as an individual. You are free to choose that as an individual, but that's a choice you're making as an individual. It's not your job because you've been elected and selected to be on the Personnel Policies Committee. Committee composition. Got 2 halves of this slide, and 1 half is for the licensed, 1 half is for the non-licensed. Now, what about building level representation? I find that while the law is entirely silent about building level participation, most staff groups think that's important for teachers. Who's this licensed PPC from primary? Okay, and secondary, and intermediate. Okay, there's nothing making y'all do it that way. 100% of your PPC could come from the high school. 100% of your PPC could come from your preschool. It could. There's nothing to prevent it from doing it. But most districts don't choose that. They choose building level representation because at some fundamental foundational level, it just feels fairer. Okay? Your PPC is supposed to have no fewer than 5 classroom teachers and no more than 3 administrators, one of whom may be the superintendent, but there is no upper ceiling or limit. Y'all could have a PPC with 30 people on it if you wanted to, and that sounds like a bad idea to me. But you could. I mean, there's a lot of bad ideas y'all could take and run with, and there's no one to tell you you can't do it. And the law says that the PPC is supposed to be elected by secret ballot, that the election is supposed to be conducted entirely by the teachers, for the teachers, and of the teachers. Entirely. And the administration has absolutely no role in this process. So people are like, sometimes I get the call that goes something like this: we don't have a PPC. Okay. You can give them an opportunity to do that, but if they don't choose to, there's nothing you can do to make them. You know, it's okay. It's there for them. Classified. There is supposed to, law says there's supposed to be job area representation, and these are the jobs that they say are supposed to be represented. Now, do you remember when I went and was allowed the privilege of facilitating PPC selection in a school district that had 0 PPC? I said, got to the classified bit, and I said, these are the categories, go figure it out. And they said, well, we've outsourced food service, there's only one food service employee in the whole district. So it sounds like a decision to me. And then sometimes people call me on the phone and they say, okay, Kristen, what do we do with nurses? I'm like, don't ask me, y'all figure it out. I don't have any authority here. It's what the classified employees decide to do with nurses. And it could be different from one school district to the next, and that's okay. Because if the law cared real hard, they would have put it in, right? I give you the opportunity to figure it out. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. What if the staff doesn't like how the PPC is operating? Well, okay, that's on them. But sometimes people like to complain about the PPC. Sometimes people just like to complain. Have y'all noticed that? Yeah, okay. And so if the staff don't like what the PPC's doing or not doing, or if they're unhappy that they don't ever seem to meet, or they don't ever do anything, or they don't actually bother to show up at board meetings, well, guess who that's on? That's on the staff. They need to pick better. You always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got, right? So, you know, just tell them, so sad, too bad. Do better next time, okay? PPC member selection is raw democracy in action. Is there a social studies teacher in the room? Is there a history major in the room? That would be me. Okay, it is the PPC selection by the staff is probably the closest thing you will ever experience to raw democracy. Now, in my universe, I am a very process-oriented person. Maybe you figured that out by now. I think practically everything you do in life should be preceded by a conversation about what the plan is for how to do this thing. What's the plan? How are we going to do this? How are we going to approach this task? Theoretically, a PPC election could begin with such a conversation. I don't think that actually happens on the ground. Typically, the incumbent PPC has a great deal to do with the election of the new PPC, and everyone seems fine with that, and no one has any standing to challenge it. And if the staff don't rise up in rebellion against it, well, it's fine. But I mean, y'all could have a karaoke contest to pick who's on the PPC. You could. There's nothing to prevent it. There's nothing to prevent it. Y'all could draw straws. Y'all could draw straws. I mean, in theory, the law is silent on whether you take nominations or not. The law just says secret ballot election. Okay, now, what about terms? What about terms of office? Our observation is there are often fixed terms and a rotation to ensure continuity so that the whole thing doesn't just turn over with a whole brand new group of people every year. But there's nothing in the law about that. That's just how individual groups of staff have worked out would be a good and reasonable way to do it. So you could have positions for 1 year, multiple year, until retirement. Sometimes school districts, you know, once you get on the PPC, sometimes it's hard to get off. Yeah, it seems to be your fate and you're stuck there. And unless you quit, that's one way to get off the PPC, quit, die, or retire. Your fellow people seem to keep on doing that to you. You might ask yourself why. And again, it's up to the staff how many area representatives there are on the classified PPC, how many teachers are on the licensed PPC. Now remember, I promised you when I made a suggestion, I would clearly label it a suggestion. Here's a suggestion slide. I would suggest that while the board and administration cannot statutorily direct or policy about PPC elections, that it is polite and courteous to create an opportunity for PPC selection, often at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year, depending on the tradition of that particular school district, I have suggested, to many superintendents that an hour be set aside during professional development in the summer for the licensed staff to come together. Administration leaves. The licensed staff has that opportunity to be together too. If they choose to use that time for such a purpose, they could then pick their own PPC members. And a similar opportunity could be afforded the classified staff. Typically there is a time of year when they all come together in one place. Often that is also at the beginning of the year. And I'm like, bring in tea and have cookies. I mean, be nice about it. And just ask that they give you a list of the names afterwards. And then you'll know who the PPC is. Okay? I don't, of course I wouldn't, would I? I don't think there's anything wrong with people like me coming in and making careful, informational presentations about what the law says about this. I have had staff members from the teachers union, from the AEA, attend my trainings. One in particular, the woman came up to me afterwards and gave me a great big old hug and didn't disagree with a single word I said. Of course, she was listening to me with like wolf ears, right? But I was preaching law. I was preaching from the book. I was preaching the word from the book. And she recognized that was all I was doing and was very careful to make my suggestions labeled suggestions and my advice labeled advice. And we had no difference of opinion. Okay? And I am a strict constructionist. I'm never going to ask anybody or suggest to anybody that they, cut the corners or jerk people around, because that's not a sustainable model for leadership. Okay? But I do really suggest that everyone, with respect to their own roles, resist mission creep. Don't let people manipulate you into mission creep. Resist mission creep. Call it what it is when you encounter it. Like a lot of things, it's easier to see other people's mission creeping than it is to see your own mission creeping. But if everybody sort of has a pinky swear promise that you'll call out my mission creep I'll call out yours if you call out mine. Kind of like the girl code, where you don't let somebody walk around with spinach in their teeth. Does anybody remember pantyhose? Remember pantyhose? Those archaic devices that we used to crawl into, and sometimes you would come out of the bathroom. And the girl code is you rush up to a strange woman and protect her while you tell her and you tug her so that her rear end, and used to, they told you to try to resist wearing panties under your pantyhose, for the purposes of ventilation, so you could really be showing your business entirely by accident. Okay. So the licensed PPC duties, the law says that y'all are supposed to organize yourself in the first 9 weeks of school to elect a chair and a secretary. Licensed PPC, have y'all done that? Who's the PPC chair, please? Oh, okay, cool. Okay. You're supposed to develop a calendar of meetings, and then y'all are supposed to propose new and amend old personnel policies that impact your certified employees. Okay? You are supposed to review board proposed new personnel policies or changes that affect certified employees. And the law is kind of old, and it was a very papery world back then. And so they envisioned that you were going to physically create and print and post, like with a thumbtack, the minutes of your meetings on like physical bulletin boards. Okay? Isn't that cute? That's so quaint. Now, what do I really think happens? I really think y'all email those out like normal people. It's I have a 24-year-old son, and I sent him a text and I said, call me. And he called me in like 2 seconds, and he thought somebody died. So now I say, can you call me when you have a minute? It's not an emergency. Because I scared him. You try not to scare your kids, turns out. That's what you try really hard not to do. and it's like when I call him, he thinks there's something wrong because why are you being a weirdo and calling me when you should have texted me, right? Okay. Now here's something you might not have realized. There is a law that says, and it's not with the PPC law, it's over in the student discipline section of the law book. But did you know, licensed PPC, that it was also your job to review student discipline policies and data and make recommendations to the board concerning these? I will say that I do get some surprised Pikachu faces when I tell PPCs, licensed PPCs, that was also their job. They're like, oh no, I didn't know that. Okay, did y'all know that? Okay. Now, that does not mean, now let's clarify that does not mean that to change a student policy, it has to go through you like a personnel policy. This is just basically an annual responsibility that you're supposed to do. So it's kind of like there already is a handbook committee. Y'all are like the PPC version of the handbook committee. All of your recommendations are going to the same ultimate place, which would be the board. They could. They almost never do. This is a little known duty that is almost never fulfilled. I don't want to make you feel bad. You don't get around to it or have time because, typically you're going to put it off into the spring and y'all are real busy in the spring. But it is statutorily your job. Now, nothing bad happens to you if you don't. There's no thou shalt, and this is what happens to you if you don't attach to any of these PPC laws. There's no consequence. But the law does give you that job for what it's worth. Okay? Classified PPCs.
Question.
Yes, absolutely.
On the minutes, should the board see the PPC minutes?
No, not your job, not your problem.
Because in the past, haven't we sent the minutes to the board?
I think a couple of years ago we did, but we stopped in the last few years.
Yeah. I don't need to know what y'all talk about.
That was
That's your
requested.
business.
At the time, it was requested that we do so. And the person who requested is no longer at this district.
Ah.
To put in that?
No, to send it.
To
That he
send it.
requested to send it.
Oh, okay.
And we didn't know at the time.
That you
that we
didn't have
could say
to.
no. But we do know
And
that
you
now.
could have said no.
Yeah.
And,
We were baby board, we were baby
Right.
PPC there.
And that was kind of a mission creepy thing that they did to you. They mission crept on you.
One of several.
Yeah, yeah. And, but, I'm also a big believer is that when you know better, that gives you the opportunity to do better. And there's also a lot of power that everybody's had this experience of, this shared experience of getting the same information at the same time in the same place. And then y'all can all say, hey, do you remember that girl who, called me a girl, yeah, I'll take that all day. You know that old woman who came and ranted on about PPC stuff? Well, she said, yeah, that would be me. Y'all can talk about that. Okay. Classified PPC, y'all are supposed to organize in the first 9 weeks, elect a chair and a secretary. Classified PPC, have y'all done this?
Elections last week, we'll meet to elect the chair and secretary.
Okay, well y'all are kind of tight on time, so.
We are, but we're still in the first.
Okay, so when y'all do that, shoot the superintendent an email to let him know who the PPC chair and secretary are, so that he can route things to the appropriate people, okay? And 2 is your job to develop a calendar of meetings and to propose new and amend old personnel policies that impact classified employees. You're supposed to review board proposed new personnel policies or changes that affect classified employees, and you too are supposed to create and distribute minutes of your meetings. You can see that the laws are very similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're very similar. The license law came first, the classified law came later, and the classified law is clearly based on the model of the license law. So what if they don't? So what if all these things that y'all are supposed to do don't happen? Well, the administration, the board, cannot force the PPC to form, meet, review policies, or post minutes. Nothing happens if you don't. Now, people may talk bad about you behind your back, but that will be the extent of any consequence, okay? The PPC has a right to the opportunity to review personnel policies that impact their employment category. They have the right to address the board, okay? But the failure of the PPC to meet, review, address the board in no way prevents policy adoption from going forward. It is not true that the PPC can stop or block something by simply choosing to stop attending board meetings. They're just choosing not to contribute their voice to the conversation. It does not block anything procedurally. Your policy can, and our model policy does, restate the law concerning the PPC for the convenience of the school board. I don't suppose y'all have your policy manual in place. Not handy. No, it's okay. I just wanted to say that there is a policy that we made, and we stuck it in section 1 that deals with the board. Okay, and we don't usually make policies that don't do anything else but paraphrase the law. In that case, we deliberately and consciously made a policy that did nothing and added no value except to paraphrase the law. We did it for a very specific purpose, and the purpose was, we thought y'all could find it quicker in a board meeting if it were a policy than if you had to go pawn through the whole stupid law book, which is this thick, right? Unless you had it tabbed. You know, I told your superintendent when we were chatting before the rest of y'all got here, that if he looks for something in the law book for more than 5 minutes, all of his life is a dark mistake. He should have already called me or shot me an email, but that is not a good use of his time. The law book is not user-friendly. You cannot find stuff in it. It is indexed crappily. I mean, spectacularly crappily. Okay? So, you know, I thought y'all could find it quicker. So but I added nothing. We added nothing. There is no secret sauce, and there are no sprinkles. I am such a fan of putting cute sprinkles on cupcakes, y'all. Catch me afterwards and I'll tell you my secret sprinkles, okay? But there are no sprinkles. We added no sprinkles. We just barfed up the law from the law book for your fast, handy convenience in a school board meeting should a crisis evolve, okay? So your board has no power by policy to determine or dictate the internal operation of the PPC. They can't force you to have building level representation. They can't tell you you have too many PPC members. They can't demand that there be a years of service criteria before you're allowed to serve on a PPC. Not their job, not their problem, not their business. Paws off your business. Keep their paws off your business. If they try that, and it sounds like some stuff has been tried in the past, that's mission creep, and you should say no to mission creep. Okay? What about bylaws? What about bylaws? Law has no opinion on bylaws. Y'all are completely free to adopt bylaws. Now, I recommend that every newly composed PPC choose to ratify or not the existing bylaws for that upcoming school year, but that's just my recommendation. Y'all could ignore me. But I mean, that just seems like an orderly way to do it. Do we still think this is going to be our blueprint for how we operate? You could ask if your process would be involved in it. Okay? No supervision over the PPC. The board has no power to make policy that governs you, bosses you, controls you. No entity on earth has any power or authority over a renegade PPC committee. In some cases, the PPC committee or a fraction of the PPC committee is begging administration to put the brakes on other people. Oh, sounds like a you problem to me. That would be a staff problem. If the staff don't like it, then the staff have the power to fix it. One of the things that I say over and over and over again is that in the long run, every school board ends up with the superintendent they deserve. Now think about that one for a minute. But in the long run, every staff group ends up with the PPC they deserve. In the long run, they end up with what they deserve because they picked it. And if they don't like what they've picked, they have the power to unpick it and do better or do differently, okay? The board also, by extension, has no authority to hear a grievance concerning PPC behavior or PPC failure to follow the law. What if somebody who works here gets all their panties all twisted up in a hard lump and they get all grumpy? They don't think the PPC was picked right. File a grievance. Guess what the board's gonna say? So sorry, you got no power to do anything about this problem you've got. This sounds like a you problem. Why don't you talk to your fellow people and see if they have a problem with that? If they don't, you know. If the PPC does not obey the law, no entity has the power to address this. Sometimes I get calls from superintendents. I can't get my PPC to meet. Okay? Then they don't meet. Well, what can I do? Talk bad about them behind their back? I don't know. Get over yourself. Now, the board does have the ability, and I believe should exercise the ability to say, okay, can we just pause right there. You're talking to us about expense reimbursement. Expense reimbursement is not a personnel policy, so we need to stop talking about this. You're talking to us about when payday is. When payday is not a personnel policy. We understand your interest, but it's not a do you have a personnel policy to propose to us? Okay, then, do you have anything else to comment on from okay, then, well, then should we move on to the discussion from the next PPC chair? You see, be nice, always be nice, but you need to be firm and just shut down Mission Creek, okay? Kristen's advice. Remember, I promised you I was going to do this, and here I am. Kristen's advice. Make sure that it's clearly communicated to everybody involved that PPC is a volunteer position that meets outside of the Contract Act. If practical, I would always recommend that the superintendent and an elementary and a secondary principal are on the certified PPC, because those people are in a position to give you information. Have you ever noticed that your fellow staff members are kind of like parents, in that they are going to only tell you that little fractional slice of information that reflects the very best on them? They're probably not going to tell you the whole story. And sometimes when you get the whole story, you realize you don't actually have a problem, and you can go on to other things on the agenda.
Should the administrators be voting participants on it?
The law is silent. Let me point out a couple of things on that subject, but thank you for asking that question. First of all, remember that your school administrators are also licensed employees of your school district, and the policies are binding on them as employees just like they're on you. If they're not allowed any voice at a PPC meeting, then administration has no voice or representation at all. They're completely outnumbered. What harm does it do to let them vote? But whether you do or you do not let them vote is up to the internal operation of the PPC, and the board has no role in dictating to you what you do. But I think it's fair to let them vote, and I think it's fair to let them participate, not just as members of the administration, because they are also employees of the school district. That's just what I think. Does that help?
Oh yeah, I think it's very good to have them on there, because they usually know more than what's going on, so.
Right. Okay, so I accidentally got crazy with my, it just lost its mind. Am I going backwards or forwards? I'm going forwards. I need to go backwards. Okay. Come on. We are. Okay. This is complicated. So I'm gonna talk you through this, and then I'm gonna get you out of your seats, and we're gonna act it out. Okay, so this is about to get participatory. You've been warned. All right? So, there are only two possible paths to policy adoption. Way number one is it starts with the board. Way number two is it starts with the PPC. Those are the only two ways. There is not a third hybrid way, but everybody thinks there is, and it's like my mission in life is to kill that one. Okay? But I'm not very good at my mission because it keeps on springing up. Okay, so way number one. Now, just before we get deep into this, I just want y'all to count dots. You see that there are 5 dots on the board side, and there are only 3 dots on the PPC side. It takes longer if something starts with the board. If y'all have something that needs done in a hurry, you need to go sweet talk the PPC into coming to a board meeting and saying it's all their idea, and can you pretty please do this, mother, may I? And the board can say yes on the spot. Okay? If you need something done fast, you need the PPC to be nice and cooperate. Got that? But with the board has to, step 1, formally adopt something as a proposed policy. It doesn't mean it will become a policy, it just means a procedural step that will position it to be later votable. Step 1, proposed policy. Step 2, goes to the PPC. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I like evidence, and I like a paper trail. Nobody likes a paper trail like a lawyer, okay? I tell my superintendents, this is Kristen's advice, this is not the law, this is what Kristen says to do. Send a memo to the PPC or an email. Say, last night, PPC, this was adopted by the board as a proposed policy. See attached. Today is day 1 of your 10 days. Go. Okay? And the PPC is entitled to 10 business days to meet or not meet, talk or not talk. It's y'all's time to do what y'all want to do if you want to do something concerning that proposed policy, okay? The board has to come back to a second meeting, ask you what you think. Now, what if you don't come? Well, I guess they know what you think. You don't care. If you show up, you'll be asked as the chairperson, or if you're the chairperson of the PPC, you have the ability to name a designee. Sometimes, when there is harmony and cooperation, the PPC will ask the superintendent to serve as the designee of the chairperson to read something out loud from the PPC, to save the PPC member the trouble of coming to a board meeting when they could be at home watching TV, right? Because TV's good. I like TV. Okay, and then the board then, by having observed the procedural steps, now has the ability to make a decision. Okay? They, at that second meeting, they have the power to adopt the proposed policy, they have the power to reject it, or they have the power to refer it back. Now, if you look at the 4th bullet, it says that by the next regular meeting after the talk meeting, so at meeting number 3, they have to do something. They can't just let it go into limbo and lie there like a leftover in the refrigerator until it gets green and fuzzy. Okay? Which also means that if a proposal has been made to the board by the PPC, they can't just let it die. They have to actually make a decision about it. They can't leave y'all in limbo either. Now let's talk about PPC proposals. First meeting, PPC proposes. Now, in the real world, what often happens is there has been good cooperation and good communication between the PPC and the superintendent. It is a very cooperative relationship, and the PPC and the superintendent are in agreement, and the PPC is gracious to the superintendent and smiles down upon the superintendent and makes a proposal to the board as their own proposal, making it instantly votable by the board. Okay? Now, in the real world, this is what happens. PPC chairperson proposes, all the heads on the board swivel to the superintendent. We heard what you say, all eyes go to the superintendent. You're watching his face. He's either going to have a happy face. That means, yeah, we all hummed kumbaya and everybody loves this policy, we all understood each other, and then the board feels comfortable voting on the spot and saying yes. On the other hand, the superintendent could be doing this. Oh no, this is the first I've heard of this. I'm not comfortable. I need to do math. Board, if the superintendent has any look on his face other than ecstatic agreement, y'all need to slow the train down. Let the superintendent go do math, go do research. If it's a good idea, it'll still be a good idea next month. Okay? But the board has to do something next month. They can't just leave the poor PPC dangling and hanging. So you can't just passively say no, you have to actively say no if the answer is no. What if on either side of the slide the board says, yes, this is going to happen, okay, Well, it's going to happen on the default date of July 1 of 2023. Unless it's something that's time sensitive and the board asks, pretty please PPCs, go see if the staff will agree to be bound by this immediately. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Isn't it interesting that when it's a change to the salary schedule that would give everybody more money, there's always somebody who votes against it? Human nature is very funny sometimes. And this is where we come up with the policy adoption flow chart, which
Could the PPC do that same thing?
exactly the same.
Okay.
It's identical for both groups.
Okay.
Okay, we are not going to go over the flow chart because that's a terrible thing to do to people in public. But it is offered to you for your enjoyment later if that's the way your brain works. Now, let me just say that I told you there's not a third way. The third way that everybody thinks there is, but there's not. It's not a thing, is where the superintendent slithers around and gives the PPC a 10-day heads up, and then, before the board ever knows a thing about it, and then the board adopts it. That is not a thing. Everybody thinks it's a thing. It is not a thing. Okay, now, at this point, I'm going to have to make a really painful and labored sports analogy, which maybe you can look at me. I was the child wheezing gently on a chair at recess reading a novel. Okay, so I am not someone for whom sports analogies come easily. But I'm going to give you one, because most of y'all like sport. Who likes sports? Okay. You're at a basketball game. Has anybody ever gone to a basketball game? You know what the best thing is about basketball? 2 words: climate control. Yeah.
Accurate.
Okay. So you're at a basketball game, and there you are, and you've got your nachos, and you observe that there are teams wearing 2 different colors on the court, and they're running around, and many, many, many baskets are going through hoops, but yet the scoreboard does not change. What part of the basketball game are you watching right now? Warm up! Why is the scoreboard not changing, notwithstanding multiple baskets being shot? Because the game has not yet started. Okay? So when the superintendent slithers around and tries to give the PPC a 10-day sneak peek, that doesn't work because the game hasn't started yet. The only thing that starts the game is the board adopting it as a proposed policy. Then it's a live ball and an active scoreboard. Or the PPC proposing it to the board, then it's a live ball and an active scoreboard. Nothing else creates or produces a votable policy.
So, like when we did our handbook review of that earlier this year.
Handbook's different.
Okay.
Handbook's different. It did not have anything to do with the PPC. That was a Section 4 student policy. No, nothing to do with the PPC. So you did not do that wrong.
What about when we,
We did model policies though.
yes.
That again should have been adopted as proposed policies, formally adopted as proposed policies, or the PPC could have been gracious and put the package forward to the board. Those are the only 2 ways. There was not a third hybrid way. Now,
So we have a
is
personnel
it
policy person.
highly likely that you have been doing it wrong? 100%. Just like everybody else. And when you know, and I don't want anybody to confess, cause that does not advance the conversation. Okay? I'm just saying that when you know better, you do better, and now everybody is equipped to know better and do better. And yes, your question.
So we have a personnel policy maker.
A
Person.
A person who
Personnel.
whose staff responsibility is
Policy, right? And that's her job.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
she's
to
not
work
the
with-
maker,
to
she's
work-
just the coordinator.
To coordinate it into the policy manual
Right.
and also, but to
To
also.
coordinate, to
give it
blend
the
it.
PPC to
Right.
review and all that.
It's a clerical position. She's not making policy, she's just handling the policy that's been made by the board. Only the board can make policy.
But, okay, so there were changes to policies. and
Correct.
they were put in there,
And we were just given that.
and we were given that, and we voted to accept it. So it didn't have to go through?
Yes, it did, you did it wrong.
Okay, so we did it wrong. So when is the best time that those new policy changes need to be done in June so they can be
If
effective?
you wanna clean it up, let me tell you what, let me just tell you what you could do to clean, if you think you may have a policy manual riddled with prior procedural errors and well-meaning acts of ignorance and neglect, which would be everybody in the state, okay? I'm not pointing fingers, I'm saying group hug, okay? Okay, you could make a motion to, adopt the entirety of the current section 3 and section 8 as proposed policies. Give the PPCs 10 days, listen to what they have to say at the next board meeting, and then vote, and it would all automatically be effective on July 1, and then as of July 1 of 2023, you'd have a completely clean slate, and you would have cleansed the blood of past errors. It would be like baptizing your policies.
So PPC though only has to say we like it.
No,
It doesn't have
they only have to be allowed to comment.
Yeah, they don't have to like the policy.
They don't have to like it, they could hate it, think it was terrible,
Okay.
terrible, and talk smack about it.
And we usually get the new policies right around that May meeting, all the new ones that are coming out in that legislative session usually gets brought to
Oh,
us,
okay.
so we
So
we're
you've seen
aware
it
of them.
before we do.
Sometimes, yeah.
Typically,
Yeah.
I know that. That at was least your Tracy question, did. wasn't it, Whit?
But
Did
a
they
lot
see
of-
it before we did?
But a lot of times, it's not controversial, and the PPC is perfectly happy to present it to the board as their own work. And that's them making a relationship deposit with the superintendent. It is actually unusual for there to be a contentious relationship between administration and the PPCs. It's much more likely that it is a mutual admiration society and people are super cooperative. Every now and then you get people who are,
Can I ask a question?
absolutely,
Is the proposal always gonna be adapted into a policy?
no,
So what constitutes a proposal to become a policy? If it's board approved?
it's a
or-
maybe policy. So, I mean, like, let me give you an extreme example. Let's just say that there's a lot of, let's just say that your board likes to have a lot of options. Let's say that your board adopts possible version 1, possible version 2, and possible version 3 of next year's calendars. By adopting them as proposed policies, they have the power to make a decision between the 3 at a later date. They don't have to make the decision today. They already know they're gonna reject 2 of the 3, but they don't know which one they might want. This buys them some time. It's like it just advances the chess piece into a position where it could make a move later. It's chess. It's okay. I spent the other half of my life teaching school people about Family and Medical Leave Act, which nobody is doing right, notwithstanding it's been law since the 90s, okay? So there's this limbo period I call FMLA maybe. Somebody has had we think someone has had a qualifying health event, we've sent out the paperwork, we don't have the paperwork back from their healthcare provider, they're in a limbo state called FMLA maybe. Maybe it'll be FMLA, maybe it won't be FMLA. We don't know. A policy that has been adopted as a proposed policy, maybe it'll grow up and be a policy someday, maybe it won't grow up and be a policy someday. It's a maybe policy at that point. It was simply advanced, it just stopped being an egg and turned into an embryo. And it might be allowed to hatch someday. I did not, I'm usually the analogy queen, I have failed you. I can tell by your face that I have failed. You had a question?
I was stretching.
Oh, just stretching, I love those questions. Okay. Okay. So, now is the time for the group activity. I believed that we were going to be, that I was going to be broadcast, and that we would all be broadcast out. As it is, I think only our words are being.
Yeah, it's just audio, we're just streaming
Okay.
audio.
So, I have props. I anti-selected some of my props. I left the fairy wings at home. Because I didn't.
I'm thinking Oxford will look right now.
I kind of felt like maybe y'all had. Okay, so. We're gonna act this out.
So she has a question.
Does anybody know what this is? What is this?
We don't use
That
anymore.
is the saddest answer.
She's in my building.
I'm just saying.
I was thinking it.
It's a board, okay, it's a board, and I'm gonna give you the board, and I'm gonna make you the board president.
Ooh. Better than
It's not quite a tiara, but I'll take it. Oh, I have tiara.
Oh, I'm.
My head is perfectly tiara shaped.
I'm stealing that line. I am so stealing that line. Okay, and so what I need you to do is go print you a school board.
She gave me power.
I
know. Be careful.
Is that you? That's you. And I am gonna make you the PPC chair, and your job is to go recruit your PPC. Mr. Superintendent.
You
get a job.
It was almost in your hand.
Yes. Okay, it's been a long time. But it's been months. I think you're safe. It's literally been months. Okay, board chair, if your board adopts something as a proposed policy, you'll add the hat to the idea. Jonathan,
Yes, ma'am.
come here. You're an idea fairy. Would you like to pick another idea fairy? Somebody else to also be an idea fairy with you?
Oh, absolutely.
Pick yourself an idea fairy. Mix it up.
I'll take Matt.
Okay. Go get it. Go
That
get it.
sounded enthusiastic.
Nobody wants you.
Yeah.
I'll slide this down. No, it's all right. If you decide to make something a policy, I'll let you know.
Got glitter on it. That's
All right.
nice.
I don't think that's fair to work with the yard. He should have
Maybe somebody else.
Okay. Now, I have some ideas. And so, I'm usually making the superintendent wear fairy wings to illustrate the point that the superintendent is just a dude with an idea. He doesn't have any special statutory role because he's the superintendent. Superintendent does not have any superpowers in the PPC law. He's just a dude with an idea. he has to sell his idea to the PPC, or he has to sell his idea to the board. He's got no power except to be a salesman. All right. Now, who are you gonna sell that policy to? Here's his idea.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Board member, I think you're-
I'd want it.
Here's your idea. Show it to him.
I think he's.
We wanna see it.
I don't know if I can do that.
Attention to those were some big hearts.
All right, let's be
Board members, Chairman.
I
forgot. Reality there.
Okay. What do you think would be most initially receptive to this? Who are you gonna go to first to make your argument? Everybody gets one extra personal day.
PPC.
PPC, okay, where's the PPC, go be together, board, go, get over here. Board, y'all go get in a corner, so y'all can confer. Those have been on nobody's head.
Then I'll put it on.
Everything on their long
Not even that that's y'all.
I'll get over here, come up through. I'll get over here with the audience.
And make your argument to the PPC.
Sell it.
Sell it.
Sell it.
Everybody should get an extra personal day. Because they deserve it, they earned it.
Okay,
But
so.
did they earn it?
Yes.
People call it sick all the time.
They still have ours.
Okay, so the argument for everybody gets one extra personal day is we're really not in a position right this second to give a significant salary increase.
There you go.
But this is a way that we can show appreciation and respect. Okay? That neighboring districts are more generous with personal days than we are. This is a little something we can do to be competitive, he might suggest. So PPC, do y'all agree to present this as your own policy to the board?
Everybody vote?
Y'all wanna take a little vote? Would your bylaws let you vote? Okay, you have a hat that says proposed on it. Are you gonna take that idea and take it from an idea and promote it to a policy proposal? And now PPC chair, you and him go to the board. And PPC chair, you're the talker.
Okay. So we have been given this idea,
Speak up so
like
everybody
everybody gets an extra personal day, since the board is not able to give a substantial raise. This would help us to raise morale and, just give us a little extra boost towards people and give people a little.
Now, what would be a reasonable question for the board to ask? Remember, the board has to make wise decisions that benefit the whole district. What's a reasonable question for the board to ask the superintendent? Hint, hint, hint.
What are we spending on subs right now?
Right, can we afford it? Mr. Superintendent, have you done the math? Yes, says Mr. Superintendent, I have done the math. This will cost us $48,000 a year. That's not a ton of money. We can afford it, it'll be okay. So, hold it. I gave the PPC the crowns when I was supposed to give them to the board. I'm sorry.
Jenny, you're giving.
Sorry to crush you.
You're giving the tiaras anyway.
Okay, so if y'all adopt a policy, you crown it and it's gonna become policy.
You got that here?
Okay, so this policy,
That's reasonable.
board.
Bailey, this
This
camera.
policy has come to you from the PPC. It can be voted on right now. Doesn't have to be voted on right now. You could say, interesting, huh? Okay? Or you could say, heck yeah, let's do this thing.
But is it for everybody, we should say, because if there's so many that miss so many days and don't come to school, we could ask questions.
Well, it's not the role of the board to ask questions, so it's somebody's role to ask questions, I'd like to really about freaking come to work. You know, before you can really clamp down on that, you need to be really sure that your FMLA practice is clean and shiny and sparkling, and you're in compliance. And most districts are not doing the job there. I mean, they're making progress, but they're, in many cases, not quite there. Usually takes a couple of years after the administrative staff and the central office has been trained for them to really master the material and start capturing all the possible FMLA. So if you do have an attendance problem, that's the first line of attack, is to make sure you're not under-identifying FMLA, which is functionally is excused absences for progress. Okay, that's just an aside. Okay, but this is votable. Do y'all wanna vote now or go, we'll take it under advisement and do it next week? That would be a choice you can make.
I think we should take it under advisement.
Okay, so y'all are feeling it? Okay, so thank you very much. They'll make a decision one way or another. Okay, now, Mr. Idea Fairy, who are you gonna go to with this one? Directly to the board?
This is a financial one.
For who?
Let's
Top to bottom?
But you're gonna make, he's gonna ask you to make two proposed policies. One proposed policy that's $1,000 bonus for every license. A second proposed policy that's $1,000 bonus for every classified, pro rata if somebody gets less than 1.0 FTE. Okay, follow that? And you need to do two to do something for everything, because one has to go to one committee, one has to go to the other committee. So y'all don't, if y'all think this is an idea worth entertaining, maybe your procedural move is to make it future considerable by adopting this proposed policy. It doesn't mean you will do it in the future. It just means you move it into a position where you procedurally could.
Your data collecting in the conversation.
Correct. It's a way of starting the conversation about this. So your threshold for adopting something as a proposed policy could and should be relatively low. Any idea that's not just a terrible idea is worth thinking about and talking about, but you do need to use some discretion. If it's a terrible idea, don't even give it the dignity of adopting it as a proposed policy. Just shut it down. Kill it before it breathes. You nip it in the bud. Okay, so what is your choice? You are going to adopt this proposed policy? Okay, then you can add this hat. And now you go hang out with the Ppc for 10 days.
Well, I'm upset.
Okay. Okay, so the Ppc now has the opportunity but not the obligation to use that 10 days or not use that 10 days. So let's assume you choose to use that 10 days. Y'all are gonna have a conversation among yourselves about whether this is what you want to do strategically. Do you want to get behind and say green light, yes please, to a $1,000 bonus, or do you wanna make what would in effect be a counter proposal to the board for a $2,500? But then you risk making them mad, and then you get nothing. So there's some strategy, right? So what do y'all want to do? What are y'all gonna, what's your conversation gonna be about what you're gonna say to the board when you go back to the board?
Is something you want to teach back to our board, or is this something you want to counter?
Well, do we know if there's enough money to counter?
He's the assistant superintendent, ask him.
Or do you recommend?
And is this a one-time bonus, or is this gonna happen every year?
Hey, this is an easy.
One-time bonus.
Let's jump on this.
One-time bonus. We can handle it.
For one time?
Yep.
Okay, is there sometimes we hire people late in the year, is there a stipulation on, do they have to start in August, or,
Oh,
So that
that's
would
a
be
good
the,
question.
yeah, that would be the FTE.
No,
You prorate
FTE's
it.
just whether they're full-time or
So,
not.
I would think you wanna prorate it, but I guess that's really up to
What
the PPC.
some
how
people
you
have
wanna do
done
it.
with some of their ESSER money is done retention. And if you started and you work the whole year, you get the whole amount, and if you start late, then you're eligible for a fractional share.
Because I don't think it's fair for all of those that have been here since August to get $1,000 and then the person who's hired in December gets the same amount of money. They have workers' comp.
This is true. This is
So we
true.
wanna count on it.
Well, and you can also say the same thing, if you accept this proposal for $1,000 and it's, they're under contract, they get their $1,000, but then they quit, they still get their $1,000.
That's true.
They'd have to wait till contract ends, so it would be June 30th.
Well, it sounds like this is a very thoughtful PPC. And it sounds like to me that they want to raise some issues with the board. So come on, PPC chair. We're gonna pretend that it's been 10 days and we're gonna come back. And you're gonna say, we have some concerns, we don't feel comfortable recommending that y'all go forward with this, and let me explain to you why. First of all, you've got people who will get this, who started on July 1 or on August the 8th, and who've been here faithfully ever since, and they'll get $1,000. And then there's that cat you hired last week. And, you know, and that doesn't seem fair. And then there's people who may not finish the year, and they too will get their $1,000 and run. So what the PPC would like to propose is that the bonus be prorated, that you have to work the full contract year to get the full amount. You work less than the full contract year, you'll get a fractional amount representing the number of days you worked, and that it only be payable in the summer to people who have completed the entirety of their contract year, and it would sort of be a summer surprise, that you would do it now, but it would be like on a slow fuse. And so they would make that proposal to you, and if you liked it, you could adopt it. Wait. You could say no to that one, because this is a fluffier one with more detail, and you could make that one a proposed policy that would be future votable after you had more time to think about it. What do you think? Or you just wanna accept it on the spot? Or do you want to?
Yes.
Remember, y'all are board members responsible for the financial stability of the school. You're not teachers voting on this.
Okay, now the thing about this 10 days.
I know, you thought Jonathan was gonna get, okay, does acting it out help get it into your brain a little bit more? Alright, so you can give me that.
So do we get this in July?
Okay, I work in, right? You asked a question about the 10 days. So, in the 10 days, the PPC has, done their thing and they've gone back. Well, how do we go back? Because maybe that was proposed at one board meeting and it's 30 days till the next board
Okay,
meeting.
now if it were me, and in my perfect world, I'd color code the crap out of this stuff, okay? I'd have one color for a proposed policy that started the 10 days. I'd have another color for a proposed policy that was votable, and then I would have a third color for a proposed policy that was do a thing, even if it's wrong, you gotta vote on this policy this time. I would, because you could, just think about a calendar. You could have the CPPC like calendar A, the licensed PPC like calendar B, administration have problems with A and B proposing C, and it could get confusing fast when you have multiple similar policies that cover the same ground. I would color code the crap out of it.
Okay, so, but the 10 days, the PPC has the 10 days to look at it,
If it
But
is a
it doesn't-
board-started policy.
Okay, board started, but it doesn't have to be acted upon within those 10 days.
No, it does
Okay,
not.
that's what.
It does not. It can be acted on.
Right, if we had another.
At the next meeting. It must be acted on by the third meeting after it was adopted as a policy. You can't just pocket veto one by passively aggressively ignoring it. Got that? Okay. What about policies adopted after May the 1st? Now, if you're classified, you can just doze off or check your messages right now, because this is not gonna impact you, okay? The significance of May the 1st is as follows. May the 1st is the magic date for licensed staff. That is the date that their contracts automatically roll over for the next year unless they have been sent a non-renewal letter that would interrupt that process, okay? And that locks everything down for the next year. So the argument was, if you late adopt a policy after May the 1st, you're basically unilaterally changing the terms and conditions of the contract in an unfair way. So this was a relatively recent change to the law. What happens to a policy adopted after May 1st? To have a conversation with this, I'm gonna have to give you some vocabulary words so we all know what we're talking about. So the fancy word I'm gonna teach you is contract rescission. Now, let's use our decoding strategy that we are taught in elementary school. What does this word kind of sound like? A common implement, right? What does rescission kind of sound like? Kind of sounds like scissors. It's not an accident, y'all, because contract rescission is basically contract cutting. It lets you escape the contractual clutches. So when you uncontract, you're exercising your right of contract rescission. So when a policy is late adopted, the law says you have the ability to jump ship and they can't do anything about it. Late adopting a personnel policy that is not driven by law or regulation, and after a legislative session, not gonna lie, there are a lot of have to have a no choice policies that happen late because the General Assembly said, do this thing. And everybody's like, yes, sirs, we're doing this thing. None of us have any choice. So that doesn't trigger contract rescission. It is only a chosen late policy adoption, not a forced one, that triggers contract rescission. It causes the superintendent's office to have to send a letter out to everybody who is impacted by the late change saying, hey, you could escape us and go work someplace else, notwithstanding you've already signed your contract for next year. So, and this only impacts policies that are in what I call the caution zone. That's the second flow chart, is the caution zone one, okay? And that's for policies that are adopted between May the 1st and June the 30th that impact licensed employees. So you can play bait and switch with the classifieds all day long. They never get a right to escape the school district's contractual clutches, but teachers do. Follow that. But bad things could happen to a teacher who tries to leave the school district who's under contract, and there is no penalty for classifieds. Y'all can go work for a neighboring school district and nobody can block you. So it's kind of a little bit more fair than you think. And that's your flow chart for the policy adoption caution zone. Now, in reality, this is not as big a deal as it sounds like, as it turns out. Number one, y'all have a lot of control over when you put through your policy changes, and if you do it in an orderly fashion, well, prior to May the 1st, then you're never gonna have a problem, which I highly recommend, okay? The other thing is, we already talked about that. Many late changes are simply tweaks to the salary schedule for next year. So, Nurse Kelly, they're gonna give nurses district-wide a raise. they make that change late, is that gonna hurt your feelings so much that you're gonna get a raise for next year, that you're gonna leave the school district? Right, no. Who's a teacher? They've added money to the salary schedule. They did it in the middle of May for next year.
Okay,
Is
good.
that gonna hurt your feelings so bad you're gonna go work for Springdale?
No, I'll stay.
Okay, right. Right. Most of these late changes are fine tuning tweaks to the salary schedule. Or, we don't have a this anymore, we shouldn't have a stipend for the salary schedule for this thing we haven't had for 3 years. We no longer have a contact tracer. So we don't need a $500 stipend for the contact tracer, right? Okay. And again, this is primarily an even year problem, not an odd year problem, because in an odd year, your late changes are legislatively mandated, not choices. They're forces. They're compelling us. So, when will an adopted policy be effective? We've already talked about this. The default date for policy adoption is the first day of the fiscal year, of the next fiscal year, which is July 1 of 2023. Okay, but if it's something that's time sensitive or urgent, it can be effective sooner if it is put to and by a majority passes a whole staff vote agreeing that the policy will be effective immediately. Typically, you only are going to do this when the calendar needs changing because it freaking snowed too many days. Okay? That is the number one reason you're going to put anything to a staff vote. The number two reason you're going to put anything to a staff vote is it's money and people would rather have it sooner than later. I don't know, would I want money today or do I want money months from now? Think. I'm thinking money today. I could be dead months from now. Forwarded my husband my hotel reservation emails, and I said, because I'm a lawyer and I think things like this, right? I said, so if they call you tomorrow and tell you that I died in my sleep, you'll know what hotel's calling you. He's like, well, that was a cheerful thought. You know, try not to die. It's like, I'll try really hard not to disappoint you. Okay, so does that make sense? Your late adopted policy, your May adopted policy, your final board action in May adopted policy is still going to be effective on July 1 of 2023. It's just also going to trigger contract rescission. Okay? One of the reasons this sometimes is not as big a deal as you think is you do some little fine tuning on the salary schedule. You only have to notice up the people that it impacts. The people that it impacts are the people who are getting more money. So if the coach is getting an extra $200, you're just going to notify the coach and he's going to laugh and throw it in the trash. We don't notify everybody and give them the ability to exercise contract rescission because the coach got an extra $200. We just give the coach the notice because that's what the law says. Does that make sense? The only time you'd notify everybody would be if it was a voluntarily late adopted policy that impacted everybody. Okay? Now, I'm winding up. I'm getting close to the end. The end is near. Television is in your future soon. There are two sources of 99% of all PPC confusion. And if you can unconfuse yourself on these 2 points, you will be head and shoulders ahead of the rest of the state. Who wants to be smarter than your colleagues in the rest of yeah, I'm all over that too. Everybody wants to be smarter than the average bear, right? You want to be smarter than the average PPC bear. Master these 2 things and you'll be there, okay? Source of confusion number 1. When is ballot behavior a vote? And when is it something else? If you will force yourself to use language very strictly and with precision, you will keep your brain straight. PPCs love to engage their constituencies in balloting behavior. Hey y'all, what do you think about this? Hey y'all, do you think we should ask for that? says the PPC to the staff. Tell us by putting pieces of paper in a aluminum foil covered shoebox or something, or answer this email with SurveyMonkey, you know, to be all high tech and fancy, okay? Those are polls. Do not confuse a poll with a vote. Call a poll a poll. Reserve the word vote only for those situations where the board has taken final action and the only question remains is, do we do nothing and go with the flow and the default date of July 1, 2023, or do we ask if people would volunteer to be bound by this sooner rather than then? Call that a vote, and you will not confuse yourself. Call a poll a poll, call a vote a vote. Do not use vote for both. You will confuse yourself. Because people call me all the time when we have conversations that go something like this. The PPC put it to the staff on Monday and they voted for it. And then they came to the board meeting on Tuesday and the board agreed to it. So now what has to happen for us to be able to write checks? Me. Now the PPC has to put it to a staff vote. But they already did that on Monday. No, they didn't. It was a poll. You cannot substitute a poll that happened before the board voted for a vote that can only take place after the board votes. So a vote follows a vote. A poll is irrelevant. It is simply cultural and voluntary PPC behavior. It's not required by law. It is simply something you do because you think you're supposed to do it and it makes people happy. But you could stop doing it and nothing would happen, except maybe people would be marginally less happy and maybe they wouldn't put you on the PPC again. And that might or might not hurt your feelings. Okay, just saying. Okay.
Okay, Jennifer, help me out here. Okay, in the spring, we usually do this calendar thing.
Yes.
So.
And there is a lot of polling surrounding
we say
that.
vote on the calendar you like, but it's really polling.
Correct.
Since the.
No vote is ever necessary on a calendar
Okay,
for
that's what I was
next
gonna
year.
say, cause they just come to the board, they propose it, and so we can say, okay, we like it, and then it's done, and we get it right?
Yeah,
Okay.
perfectly. You actually accidentally did that right. But what sometimes happen is people just lose their minds and they think that to really make it official, then the staff has to
Revote.
revote, and they don't, because the default date is great.
For
Nobody
next year.
cares about it being effective until July 1. Does that make sense? So, you know, there's only a limited handful of things that need to be fast-tracked. Fast-tracked is the exception, not the rule. You want to fast-track money, you want to fast-track an emergency change to the calendar so your non-refundable spring break airline tickets do not go to waste, because that would make me super cranky. The only other time I ever see people get excited about something and want to late adopt a policy is beloved teacher has cancer, everybody wants to direct donate sick leave, they can't because there's not a policy that lets them do it, and everybody wants to do it. So they push it through and vote it and direct donate it, and she dies anyway. Or maybe not. Maybe she gets better. Sorry. Okay. Number 2, confusion. When do the stupid 10 days start? Again, if you can keep your mind straight, there's only one thing on earth that starts the 10 days, and that's the board adopting it as a proposed policy. That's when the clock starts. There is nothing the superintendent can do unilaterally that has the slightest impact on the 10 days. Superintendent has no power over the 10 days. He can't start it. Only the board can start the 10 days, and that is only runs from board to PPC. It does not run PPC to board, yes.
Can PPC wait the 10 days?
No. Them waiving the 10 days is them making it as a proposal to the board. Board adopts as proposed policy, PPC chair, but they would take the PPC chair in a board meeting acting unilaterally, which might make the rest of the PPC really cross with her or him. Oh, says the PPC chair, I will just greatly exceed all the authority my peers have given me and propose that right back at you and make it instantly votable. Well, there might be some hard conversations the next day if you lost your mind and did that. Or not, just depends on your group.
But I feel like, okay, so the 10 days, the board, we say, okay.
The
we
10
like
days
this.
is for the protection of the PPC.
Okay, so the PPC meets right away, cause they're like, woo, we love the board for us.
Yeah.
And they say, we like this, and it's only been 5 days.
They
That's
could
okay.
see if they could sweet talk the superintendent into having a special call board meeting,
Okay.
but y'all, boards hate special call board meetings.
So they just have to meet within 10 days. The board can still take
The
take
PPC
action
can
within
do with their 10 days, those 10 days belong to the PPC. They can do what they want to do with those 10 days.
But the
They
board
can
can
be-
take action
they
before the
can-
10 days?
No, they
Okay.
cannot.
Yeah.
They cannot. The PPC could meet 8 of those 10 days. The PPC could meet until midnight 8 of those 10 days. The PPC could meet 24 hours a day except for work for every one of those 10 days. Cause PPC does what PPC does and ain't nobody got any power over PPC. Or they could crickets. They could just watch Netflix and chill. And do nothing. And not even show up at the board meeting.
But if we said, if we really wanted to do whatever it was we were doing, and we say, okay, we're gonna call a special meeting in 10 days, or in day 11, that's giving them the opportunity to look at it, and they can come to that meeting because it's a public meeting.
Or you could say to the superintendent, hey, can you go sweet talk the PPC? We would be willing to have a special call board meeting if they would be willing to come propose that back at us so we could do that for y'all sooner. Every now and then, a superintendent will give his fanny in a crack. Did you know that the word fanny in Great Britain does not mean your bottom? Be very careful saying that word there. Okay. But every now and then, but in the United States of America, fanny means your bottom, and your granny would paddle your fanny, and nobody thought it was a reason to call DHS. Okay. Every now and then, here come standards of accreditation, and the superintendent wakes up and realizes that the policies are in disarray, and there are problems, and it's about to be ugly, and and I'm like, okay, superintendent, this is what you do. Cater in lunch and ask the PPC and buy you some substitutes and see if you can get the PPC to pretty please, mother may I, beg, nice, come have lunch in your office and see if you can get them on your side to go to this emergency board meeting you're about to call, to get them to propose that to the board, and then he'll hypnotize the board into saying yes, and then he will hypnotize y'all to putting it to a staff vote, so in the nick of time you can save the whole school district's fanny and you don't lose your accreditation and go to hell, because that would be a bad place to go, and it would be hot. And we don't like to be hot, right? Remember? Right. Remember the advantage of basketball is climate control. Because I kind of don't do sun. You know, maybe you can look at me and tell them you kind of don't do sun. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so if you can just get that 10 days thing in your head and get the difference between poll and a vote in your head, then you will have won PPC. Okay? So here's an example of 10 days confusion. Superintendent shares a possible calendar with PPC. PPC sends the calendar ask and asks the staff to respond by returning a ballot. 10 days after sharing the calendar with the PPC, the superintendent presents the calendar to the board. What has to happen for the board to be able to implement the school calendar for next year?
That way 10 days.
Adopt it as a proposed policy, or look expectantly at the PPC to see if they're going to save you from yourself. Maybe they will. Maybe they will have mercy on you. Got it? But this is what everybody thinks. This is the way you do it. This is not the way you do it. This is not a thing. There's only 2 things. This is the third thing everybody thinks is the thing, but it's not the thing. And typically when I'm doing this, the superintendent is getting
Why you sitting back there in the corner?
Right. He's like, oh my God, they just need to take me to jail. All of my life is a dark mistake. I've always been doing this wrong. So help me God. Right? Yeah.
Superintendent for like, what, 4 months now?
He's a, I know, he's just a baby superintendent.
Yeah, but he inherited a mess.
Bless his heart. You know, I gotta say, y'all, you're probably at the bottom, and it's only gonna go up from here. I don't think there's any place lower to go. But I mean, why am I here? It's because I felt so sorry for y'all.
She did, but I told her, she said, Katie, I can come and talk to you.
And then I have rules about like road trips, and it's like I only do one a week. Did I not mention I was at Hoxie? So I broke my own rule to be here with y'all. Just because that's how sorry I felt for y'all. And, okay, y'all, I'm still feeling sorry for y'all. I will come back if you need me. Okay? Okay. So the possible answers, we already talked about that. Correct answer, we already talked about that. Same facts, different question. Superintendent shares calendar with the PPC at a PPC meeting. PPC sends the calendar out and asks the staff to respond by returning a ballot. 10 days after sharing the calendar with the PPC, the superintendent presents the calendar to the board. When the PPC sent out the ballot, was that a poll or a vote? Poll. Does a poll have any legal significance? No. Does a vote have legal significance? Yes. So we all vow, right? We will call a poll, we will call a vote. We will never call a poll a vote, because that's when we start to get confused. Poll. Okay, when you are working on your calendar for next school year, identical versions must go through both PPC groups, because every employee in the district is impacted in terms of which days are work days by the calendar. Teachers, can you even imagine what kind of fresh hell it would be to try to teach school without buses or lunch? A, you would have no kids, and B, the few kids you had would be cranky pants because they'd be starving. They would be eating your arms and legs, okay? What if something needs to happen quickly? Superintendent goes and sweet talks the PPC to propose it as their own policy, because then the 10 days are not relevant. The board looks at the superintendent, he's nodding his head real big. PPC nods their head real big, board says yes. If necessary, it's put to a vote. Done. If you need something done fast, you sweet talk the PPC. You could have checks being cut in less than 24 hours if everybody worked together. Does that make sense? Board meetings ends at 9. Y'all could get that vote, or superintendent emails you, you hit the ground running first thing in the morning, you've got the results back by 10, central office could be cutting checks by 11. That could be sweet. So conclusions, there are very few policy emergencies. It's almost an oxymoron. Policy emergency is almost an oxymoron. It does not happen. When in doubt, and especially to the board, when in doubt, wait. Let the superintendent crunch some numbers, do some research, call the co-op, call the neighboring school districts, call a lawyer, which brings me to my third point. If it sounds like a good idea, you probably haven't talked to a lawyer yet, right? You know.
You'll talk to one that's an idiot.
Not referring to you.
Present company accepted, right? In some cases, bad things happen when people reasonably rely on legal advice that turns out not to be helpful. That's sad, but that's not their fault. It is reasonable to rely on legal advice. You don't find out until much later that it was not good legal advice. So that's sad and unfortunate, and then you have to deal with the consequences, and I'm sorry that happened to y'all. Just because a policy idea sounds attractive doesn't mean y'all can afford it. Everybody has a longer wish list than an able to afford list. I would like to do a whole lot of things. I would like to give my kids a whole lot of money. I can't afford that. My son, when my son was 4 years old, I would put him in the car, and I would put him in the cart, and we would go up and down the aisles at Target, and we would buy very exciting household necessities like Ziploc bags and toilet paper. And high up on the shelves that ran along the perimeter were the very attractive Power Wheels toys. Every 4-year-old wants to sit on an electric battery-powered ride-on toy and zip around the neighborhood. And my son Thomas did not understand why, when we went to Target to spend $35 on Ziplocs and toilet paper, I didn't just put a $400 Jeep Power Wheels in the grocery cart and make his day. There was this thing called daycare I had to pay for, and this other thing called a house payment, and then these things called utilities, and that was just not ever going to happen. But he was 4 and he wanted what he wanted. We don't blame a 4-year-old for wanting what they want. And boards should not blame PPC for wanting what they want. They have one job, and that's to tell you what they want. Their job's to be an advocate for the employees and to communicate that to you. Your job's to do the hard thing, which is balance everybody's competing needs. And it's easy to say yes and make people happy, but sometimes it's responsible to say no, or later, or we'll see. It's a very parental role, and I'm not suggesting y'all are the parents and they're the children. I'm just saying that they have a smaller job, and their job's to have a Christmas wish list. I used to go pick out an angel tree child, and I would try to pick out an angel tree child that I could afford to please. I did not pick out the teenage boy who wanted an Xbox, because I couldn't afford to buy a strange child an Xbox. I couldn't afford to buy my own child an Xbox. I couldn't afford to pay for it. But he wanted what he wanted, and it was, nobody said you're poor. What do you deserve because you're a poor kid? It was, what do you want? So we're not going to shame anybody for wanting what they want. It's reasonable to want good things for your family. It's perfectly reasonable. But y'all have different jobs. The PPC's job is to want, and the board's job is to make wise and considered decisions. Because if they run you into the financial red, y'all could cease to exist. And if y'all cease to exist, they'd split you up and send the territory of this district hither, thither, and yon. Or just let Springdale eat you up. Would you have jobs then? Probably not. Okay. So the job of the board is to balance all the competing interests and desires. Do we need buildings? Do we need buses? Can we afford raises? Don't forget that any time you add to the base, that is an eternal and perpetual obligation. That's why districts sometimes do bonuses, which is a one-time thing with one-time money, as opposed to an eternal and perpetual obligation that goes on for perpetuity, because all of y'all basically have jobs for life. Okay? So that's how it works. And that's all I have. And I will stand here and answer your questions until I die. And then, but you'll have to call my husband and let him know that you killed him. Y'all were a great group. Thank you so much.
It was great. It was very informational. I think everybody got something out of it. I think we all learned.
Yes, we appreciate it.
Well, you've all learned that you've probably been doing it a little bit wrong, but just like everybody else, you have a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
But now that you know better, you do better.
Just come where we need to.
Adjourn? Yep, that's all we can ask. All right.
Sorry.
Do you have a motion to adjourn? Steve? Bobby seconds, all in favor? We are adjourned.